riots happened against the Irish and the Germans. Why were the Irish in America in the 1850s, and why were the Germans in America in the 1850s? And then the Chicago riot, because there are 6 cities that happened. A know-nothing riot happened in 6 cities in America: Chicago, Columbus, Cincinnati, CCC, SNL, St. Louis, New Orleans, and Louisville. So 6 cities you saw an outbreak of know-nothingism. You saw know-nothingism take over the Congress, the state houses, the governors, and the presidency with Millard Fillmore, with 1850 to 1853. So he was he took over the presidency for Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor was a Louisvillian who fought in the Mexican-American War. So you have, those are 3 questions. Why were the Irish in America in the 1850s? Why were the Germans in America in the 1850s? And then Chicago, what ended the riot in Chicago? Okay. So think about those questions. Your ill-tempered child ruins everything he touches. Do not get angry. Put what he can damage out of his reach. He breaks the furniture he uses. Do not hurry to replace it for him. Let him feel the disadvantage of being deprived of it. He breaks the windows of his room. Let the wind blow on him night and day without worrying about colds, for it is better that he have a cold than that he be crazy. So you got to toughen your kid, right? Leave him to the elements. Make him strong. Don't just go and, let them find out for themselves why you don't go around breaking stuff. Instead of telling them, instead of waiting for your obedience to do what is right, they will see that doing what is right is beneficial to them for their very survival. Never complain about the inconveniences he calls you, but make him be the one to feel those inconveniences first. Finally, you have the windows repaired, continuing to say nothing about it. He breaks them again, then change method. Tell him curtly, but without anger. The windows are mine. They are put there by my efforts. I want to protect them. Then you will close him up in darkness in a place without windows. In response to such a new procedure, he begins by crying and rants, and no one listens to him. Soon he tires and changes tone. He moans and groans. A domestic turns up. The rebel begs him for deliverance without seeking pretext for not doing it. The domestic responds, I too have windows to protect, and leaves. Finally, after the child has remained there several hours, long enough to get bored and to remember it, someone will suggest to him that he propose an agreement by means of which you will give him back his freedom if he no longer breaks windows. He will not ask for better. He will have you ask to come and see him. You will come. He will make you his proposition, and you will accept it on the instant, saying to him, that is very well thought out. We will both be gainers by it. Why didn't you have this good idea sooner? And then, without asking that he declare or confirm his promise, you will embrace him with joy and take him in his room right away, regarding this agreement as sacred and inviolable, as if an oath had been given out. What idea do you think he will get from this procedure about the faith of commitments and their utility? I'm mistaken if there's a single child on earth, if not already spoiled, who would be proof against his conduct to take it into his head after that to break a window intentionally. So basically the natural consequences. You could tell a child, put your clothes away, do the dishes, wash your clothes, wash yourself. But if they don't do those things, then eventually their own stench and their disgustingness will lead them to revolt against their lethargy and insolence and say, no, I don't want to live in filth, I want to be clean. And so therefore they will strive for cleanliness on their own accord. So the Irish were in America in the 1850s because of the potato famine. It happened in the 1845 to 1852 predominantly. That's the biggest part of the immigration. When the famine, the potato famine, they were primarily, there was one staple crop. That's all they were raising was the potato. It was so nutritious it actually was found. It was native. It was originally found. It was an aboriginal to America. So the Irish took the potato, loved it so much, adopted it as their only crop that they're ever going to need ever. But also you had a lot of the owners of Irish and English society that wanted them to get out undesirables, suppress wages to make sure you have cheap labor. So they didn't mind actually starving and killing large amounts of the Irish people. Much like St. Patrick, the genocidal maniac that everybody celebrates in the beginning of spring every year. So the Irish in America in the 1850s were here because of potato famine. The Germans were here because of the revolutions of 1848 had failed, so they were the 48ers. You also had some 30ers, and you had some. America was started out actually multiculturally, so there was probably 2/3 was Anglo-Saxon Protestant, 2/3 of the Americans, but there was actually a foreign element. 1/3 of them, you know, was citizens from all throughout Europe. So there was, to say that it was primarily or just one thing, I don't think you could actually do that and dominate it. It's not in our interest, and we shouldn't do it like that. Anyways, stolen ground. How can you sit there and say white Anglo-Saxon Protestants that you're Native Americans when the Native Americans are the Shawnee, the Ute, the Cherokee, the Potawatomis, the Ottawas, and the Kickapoos, and you know, just going down the line, there's like 38 tribes that can claim Kentucky. Kentucky being dark and bloody ground, of which, you know, 38 can claim this place, but also dark and bloody ground. Kentuckians were dark and bloodians. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. The polls were open from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. This is the Louisville riots of 1855, of which the owners of society, the WASP, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, the non-Catholic Christians, that's what a Protestant is, or the followers of Martin Luther more specifically. But you have, the polls were open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. Most of the voting was done before noon. The first violence occurred at the polls when some prospective voters who could not come up with the yellow ticket were roughed up and prevented from casting their vote. There are even some reports of some anti-know-nothings being stabbed. However, no deaths were reported resulting from this first display of violence. The first person to lose his life as a result of the violence of Bloody Monday was one George Berg, B-E-R-G, also spelled Burge, B-U-R-G-E. At about 9 a.m., George Berg was accosted on the street by a group of angry Irishmen and savagely beaten to death. So George Berg is one of the first fatalities of Bloody Monday, and he was murdered by the Irish, or some Irish men. So a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. It wasn't just Irish and Germans who died that day. The reason for the assault is not known. Possibly extreme frustration and not being able to vote. Oh, I can't vote. How dare you? And it could be. They were locking them out, right? So it was a lockout. You can't come in here to vote. How dare you? At midnight, at the beginning of the election day, executive committees of the American Party took control of the polls. So at the very beginning, at midnight, at the beginning of the day, so just, you know, 1 minute into the election day, they were backed up by select police officers, all party members. Several tufts were stationed at the doors. So you had to have a yellow ticket. They took over the polling places. There are only like 8 wards in Louisville. There's only 50,000 people at the time, 13,000 of them being Germans, and foreigners, right? So they're foreign element, white foreigners, right? White Christians. Well, I don't know. The Bible riots, the Pennsylvania riots of 1844, which was also the nativists, which was actually the gangs of New York with that dude with the hat. You know, that's where it started. So it's probably in the back of their mind. Once some asshole starts to, you know, hey, let's hit this Jew, and then some other asshole is like, hey, that's a good idea. So it sets a bad precedent. And all of a sudden now it's like, now, you know, it tells on themselves really. Because it says, well, who are they? If they're attacking German people, then they are saying they're English-speaking people. They're attacking Irish people. They're saying they're English from the continent of England, right? From that, actually, island. They went from the island next door. Anglo-Saxons wasn't actually from Germany, right? It was like England was its own superior, greater than thou, holier than thou thing. Anglicized, so all these things that make them sound so much more important. Really, all England has on America is our own Stockholm Syndrome and the fact that we talk the fucking language. So English is our tongue. We speak English. The way they consolidated Germany was German-speaking lands. So they shared a common language. So could someday a Hitler conquer, you know, all of Britain and America, all the English-speaking lands, and create a New England? You know, New England actually is where America first came from. Anyways, I gotta finish this, okay? So there are 2 big riots on Bloody Monday. The first took place at approximately noon to 4 p.m. in the German district. So you got 1 riot in the German district, 1 in the Irish district in Louisville. It was located in the 1st ward in the east end of Louisville, Butchertown. And what's that other name they call it? Plantation Point? No, that's not it. Butchertown and what is it? I would see it. I'd recognize it if I saw it. I'm gonna take a minute actually just to think about this, and just think about whatever you want to think about. Actually, Phoenix Hill. So Phoenix Hill is Butchertown, right? Same area. It's where there's a big Catholic church there. Actually, the guy speaks Spanish. I went to St. Joseph Church is there. It was founded in, I think, 1866, which would have been right after the Civil War, which would have been right before my ancestors got here in 69. Right, 69, woohoo. Let's get a little serious, and the first ward in the east end of Louisville were Germans. That's where they got attacked. The second riot occurred from 6 p.m. until midnight in the Irish district in the 8th ward in the western end of town. It was on 10th and 11th Street, so it wasn't like all the way to 40th Avenue, but just to 11th Street. That was the 8th ward and then the 1st ward. So there's 2 riots, and those are the 2 spots. In the German 1st ward, where they burn down the brewery, and they get drunk, and basically little damage is done. But then the Irish, just savagery, just murdering, burning entire families down. So shortly after the afternoon, mobs of Americans began to roam the streets of Louisville looking for foreigners and Catholics. It's not clear whether they were seeking vengeance for Berg's death or celebrating their control of the polls, perhaps motivated by some hatred or frustration not even known to themselves. Like, they were poor. Right, in any event, because this is also like, think of lynching. It was the whole crowd, it was the whole people. So basically the know-nothings have all the power, but that's not good enough. They had blocked the Germans from voting. They took all the power, but now they're bloodthirsty. They're power hungry, and it's not enough. They want to keep on taking and taking. They already took away from the Germans liberty, right? If you don't have a right to vote, then you have no say-so, so who gives a shit what you have to say or what you think? In any event, their incursion into the German district brought forth gunshots from the windows in the rows of German-owned houses. Once the shooting started, the mobs of Americans become uncontrollable. Knowing there would be trouble, Bishop Martin J. Spalding, leading Catholic prelate in Louisville, passed the keys of the cardinal to Mayor Barbie, charging him with its safety. The mob avoided the cathedral but marched on St. Martin's Church on Shelby Street, believing the Catholics had secreted arms there. They had, in Pennsylvania, the Irish Catholics had stored ammunition in one of the basements of their churches, so that's where that came from. To his credit, know-nothing Mayor Barbie went inside the edifice and searched it. Finding no arms, he told the mob that they were mistaken and advised them to disperse and go home. They left the church, but they did not disperse. Instead, they joined up with a marching group of about 50 armed men, shouldering muskets and bayonets and pulling a cannon. So they brought a cannon, right? There's a cannon in Louisville also. But now you have know-nothings, right? 50 armed men, muskets, bayonets, cannon. Approximately 3 p.m. they assembled at Armbruster's Brewery. So Armbruster's Brewery is where they assembled at 3 p.m. The know-nothings dead in Butchertown. Before burning this building down, the day's most costly single act of destruction, they were imaginative enough to liberally partake of large quantities of the building's chief manufacturer. So they got drunk. After they got drunk, this particular mob died down in the German district. So once the mob had got drunk, once they burned down the brewery, they felt the damage was done. They were drunk, went home, nothing else happened. The more serious acts of violence and butchery took place in the Irish district. So whereas as a German I can identify with this, the hatred really was against the Irish. And fighting here is apparently precipitated by the killing of one Theodore Rhodes when he and 2 companions were set upon by 2 Irishmen while walking through the district. So again, 2 Irishmen, it seems like they murdered Theodore Rhodes, but they're being blocked from voting. So, they didn't, the know-nothings didn't start the murdering, but they did start the intimidation and the bullying. Again, large mobs of Americans came pouring into a foreign district. The Irish inhabitants fired on the mob from houses located along Quinn's Row. This is a sad story of Francis. I've also heard him called Francis. So Francis Patrick Quinn. He owns a row of houses on Main Street. And he's a rich Irishman. So he's a, rich Irishman. Come to America, made his wealth, made his fortune. But the know-nothings were pissed. They were poor. They had no money. They saw this rich Irishman and said, how come he's got so much? And a row of houses, like 11 to 12 houses. So the know-nothing white Americans, the white Native Americans retaliated, so-called natives, retaliated by setting fire to the whole road, destroying 12 houses and burning several persons to death. Including Patrick Quinn.